I think one really good way to get started figuring out your voice, who you are, is to take a look at all the possibilities because there's so many. I know one writer who will sit down, and if they really like a specific author that has a lot, she will type in word.
Hey everybody, welcome back. It is Wednesday, and as you know, Wednesday is another day that you tune in to Leaders Talk. It is I, your intrepid host, as usual, Andrew Dupy. I'm the Chief Relationship Officer here at Leaders Press, if you haven't heard that enough already. But today, I can tell you there's somebody you haven't heard from yet, or maybe you have if you tuned in. It's Bitsy Kemper. So let me take a second to introduce Bitsy to you. Bitsy is an award-winning children's book author. She has more than 16 books in print so far. And she works from the perspective of a new mom devotional journey book that's actually coming out in October of 2023 and a new fiction picture book in 2024. And as I say, you've probably heard of her before. She's been featured twice on CNN, along with numerous other features on local television and national radio outlets. So Bitsy, welcome, and tell us a little bit more about that amazing journey you've had.
Okay, yeah. Well, I started out in the corporate world. I did PR marketing for a long time, and do you remember newspapers? Yeah, I used to co-write.
No, I don't know.
Do you remember that? I actually one of the very few people that still insist on getting a newspaper. I believe in them. There's something different about having that tangible copy in your hand. It just seems more authentic than scrolling and reading something from who knows who.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah,
So
no, actually, I will agree with you on that.
Yeah, it just seems so much more credible seeing it in print in your hands. But I digress. I used to co-write a syndicated newspaper column when I was in the computer industry, and it was about using the computer with your family. And it was helping to make people, especially parents, feel less afraid of the computer, and using the computer with your family as a tool, as a learning tool. And from there, I just started writing a lot more. I wrote, actually, obviously, in PR and marketing. But after I left the corporate job, I kept writing. I kept writing for the local newspapers. And I kind of soon realized I'm a crappy reporter. I was a reporter for a while, and crappy reporter, but a pretty good writer. And I started writing books in my head when I was taking my youngest out on stroller walks, and figured, I like this. And I started writing children's book. I started looking into what it takes to write a good children's book, and quickly realized the one that I took to a conference was really bad. And so I've written 16 books since then. I have 6 more on the way. And it was actually a year later that the first conference where I learned how bad my book was, that I presented at that national conference. And it was all about using technology in your writing, because the author world is, we're a little insulated from the technology world. We sit in our own little world, and we use our computer. I remember the first time I gave a presentation, a woman raised her hand and said, "How do you make your documents with 2 spaces? Because I just hit enter 2 times after each line." And that was well past a time somebody should have been entering twice. I just kind of married the 2 together for a while.
Yeah.
And I've been on the children's book writing journey pretty much ever since.
That is amazing, especially that you can come from a perspective of, actually finding your voice. And I want to actually concentrate a little bit on that to begin with, because you say that your first books were bad. I mean, I guess I don't know what if that was feedback that you directly got, or if that's something that you had as a personal perspective. But
yeah, they never said that. I figured it out on my own.
What did it take, though? What did it take to actually begin to produce what you would consider to be a good book? Because a lot of people's first steps yeah, their first attempts might not be what they really are trying to get to. So what's that journey look like?
Okay, well, there's a lot of ego in writing, right?
Mhm.
Because I think maybe different from our product, especially a corporate product. There's not a lot of me. When I worked at a company and I wrote a news release, for example, it wasn't me, right? It was the company's news release. It wasn't my personal work. But when we write, it's very personal, and it is me on the page. Even when I'm writing about different characters and it's in different characters' voices and different perspectives, and even in a completely different environment, it's still me on the page, right?
Mhm.
It's very personal. So it's very hard to be objective about your own work. It's very hard to look at something you've created and say, the reason this isn't getting published is because it's not very good.
Yeah.
So the reason you figure that out sometimes is because you can't get your work published. And a lot of times we look at other reasons. And there are a lot of reasons why. I mean, just like an actor doesn't get a role for a lot of reasons, not necessarily because they're not a good actor, but sometimes it just takes a really healthy dose of humility, looking at your work, saying what isn't working. And there is
Right.
a formula. There's a formula, right? In writing, there's the story arc, there's the beginning, the middle, the end,
Mhm.
there's the plot development. There is, you want to root for the character.
Yeah.
And the children's book industry, especially in a picture book, right?
Right.
In a picture book, nowadays it's 500 words. In 500 words, you have to introduce a character to me. You have to get me to like them. You have to get them to need something so bad that they're willing to go on a journey to get it. You need to get them to try and fail, try something different and succeed. Then you have to have them at the end of the story be different than they were at the beginning of the story, but be better because of something that they did and tried and are now, as a result of something they figured out on their own, are now better. So you do all of that in 500 words or less. Now,
That
yeah,
I mean that sounds so difficult. And yeah.
I gave a writing children's books presentation one time, and a 20-year-old came up to me, and he was kind of like puffing up his shoulders with this very quiet little girlfriend, and he came up to me and he said, yeah, so I wrote this picture book. It took me like a minute. So I know it's not as hard as you're saying, and I just need to know where I should send it. And he 100% was convinced that that book was ready to go. And I just said, well, if you wrote it in a minute, it's probably not ready. You might think it is, and you may have written a very good story. But if it took you a minute, there's probably more you can do. There's probably more you can add to it to make it better. So I'm not going to spend time with you talking about where you can send it, but I will talk to you about how to make it better. And he did not want to hear that. He just said, well, it's ready to go. I'll just figure it out on my own. And he walked away brusquely. And that's how writers can be, right? You're so sure that your work is ready to go that you don't always take the time to say, maybe it isn't.
Yeah. And we've had that experience as well. And I'm interested in this because Leaders Press has done some children's books. I mean, we started as a children's books publisher. We're just now releasing Camilla Makes a Splash, which is going to be something from our story leaders perspective, which put a lot of work was put into that. When I worked with the authors of that, they had spent years developing the concept, the idea, having to work other jobs and having to do other kinds of books in order to support it. And it was one of the hardest things they said that they had ever done. So is there a methodology? Is there something that someone who is interested in breaking into this kind of a field and this kind of a business can look at to try and kind of maybe bring some order to the chaos of doing so much in such a short form?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, one of the first things I would suggest is that they do their homework. One of the, I have on my website, I have a bunch of BitsyKemper.com. I have a bunch of different posts about ways to get started. And one of them is, if you want to write a children's book, you have to read a children's book, and you have to read a recent children's book, like in the last 5 years, because things change. Now, children's book are 500 words or less. Children's books, when we were kids, 1,000 words, 1,500 words, they were more storybooks.
Right.
We had longer attention spans back then.
Yeah.
Back in the day when there was just radio, we listened a lot longer. We sat down. When there was black and white TV, we listened longer. We used our imaginations to picture what the black and white, looked like, would have imagined.
Right.
And as we get older, now with TikTok, now with 11-second videos, 15-second videos, that's what kids are watching. That's their attention span. So we have to entertain kids very quickly. We have to entertain the parent that's reading the story.
Right.
And another thing, I think people that are writing children's book either do one or the other. They either write to the parent that's reading it and forget that the child has to listen, or they write to the child and forget that the parent has to read it. Mm-hmm. And both of them have to be entertained. The parent has to want to read it over and over. Mm-hmm. The kid has to want to listen to it over and over. And the third part of maybe of this triangle is that the illustration, there has to be enough, when you're writing, there has to be enough left over for the illustrator to put the other half of the equation in. Because right. A picture book is a picture book. It's 50-50. It can't exist without the words. It can't exist without the pictures. So in a picture book, for example, you wouldn't say that the girl walked to school in a red dress, because that's the illustrator's job to figure out what the girl is wearing. And you don't know if the girl is going to be an elephant. You don't know, right?
Right.
And unless that color red comes into play later, because somebody else is wearing red and they mistook her for it, or she spilled cranberry juice and it blended in, so it didn't matter, unless that color red is key, you don't mention that, because that's the illustrator's job. So when you're going through your manuscript and you're trying to figure out, how do I pare this down into words at 500 words or less, you can get rid of those kinds of words. You can get rid of words like she shyly said. You want to show that. In a picture book, you don't want to use a lot of descriptors, because you want to show that. You want to say she looked to the ground and then looked up, because that's showing, not telling. That's not telling us that she's shy. It's showing us because she looked down before she looked up.
Right.
Or, you're saying she stammered over her words.
So I kind of see children's books as not just something. I think that there's a mistake that authors make. Let me back up a second, because I think that in many cases, new children's book authors or people that are starting to get into that, they're coming at it from the perspective of just thinking, I am writing a book for a child. Yeah. When really what you're doing is you're creating a tool for interactivity between parent and child. And that really should be what you're thinking about it from the perspective of is, what do I create that's going to make this an experience in which both of them are going to be able to learn, interact, and emotionally grow together. Do you agree with that perspective? Is that something you think that's being missing right now in some new authors?
I'm literally writing this down, because that's beautiful. That is a beautiful way to describe it. Interactive, both. That's a beautiful way to describe it. I actually, in all my years, I haven't heard anyone describe it like that. That is absolutely a beautiful way to describe it. Because
I'll have a link to send you the invoice on that.
Okay. No, that's really great. And it's when the word, when you said learn, I'm like, deet, 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 my radar went off, because a lot of people think they need to teach someone a lesson. And again, remember that book I said that was just terrible, because I had in the word, and in the end they learned. And that's just like the worst possible thing to put in a book, because again, you should have shown that. You should never have to say that. You should have shown how they grew. And you show how they grew by how they solved their problem. You show how they grew by the fact that they solved their problem, not letting the adults solve the problem for them. So even though if you are teaching them something, you never want to say, and I learned the lesson, they learned the lesson, and from then on, they never went to bed hungry again. That stuff is so unnecessary because it's telling. And that emotional growth, exactly like you're saying, if you're the adults reading it, it takes you out of the moment. It takes you out of experiencing the book together.
Yeah.
That's
so. How do you actually sit down and do this? That's the question a lot of people ask that I know of, and when they're talking to us, whether it be about a business book or whether it be about a children's book or whether it be just a standard fiction book. And I do a lot of one-on-one coaching where that's one of the first things I get asked is,
yes.
How do I do this? I mean, I have the idea, I have the knowledge of what I'm trying to achieve, but it's really that how am I actually going to be able to sit down, put my thoughts together, and be able to have a methodology that I can do that's a step-by-step that I know what's going to work, and I know that I'm actually going to be able to put this down.
Okay. There's a couple ways to do that. And what I started to say, I didn't actually complete the thought. So thank you for letting me circle back to this.
Sure.
Reading other children's books is a great way for you to be able to come back and say, wow, I love this. I love the way that they did that. Oh my gosh, Pat, Zitwell Miller, she has a great way to marry rhyme with cadence. And, there's other, my friend, Lori Mortensen, she's got this beautiful way to explain things where you don't even realize she just explained something very difficult to you. My friend Erin Dealey, I swear she thinks in rhyme. Like she will, she's in our critique group, she'll say, oh, so I just wrote this morning, it's really rough. What do you guys think of this? And it's like a 32-page book, completely in rhyme. And I'm like, you wrote this morning? I hate you. Like how, because when you write in rhyme, if you change one word, you change the entire thought, right? Like you can't just change, they went to the store, she wanted some more, right? You can't, if she wanted some more, then, if she went to the store, whatever the point is that you're trying to make, a lot of people will ruin their writing because they're just trying to write in rhyme. And then the rhyme gets in the way of the story because they're forcing the rhyme. Where if they take it out of rhyme, if they just write the story, how they want it to go with their beginning, middle, and end, then they can kind of catch their breath and figure out how the rhyme might work. But a lot of people just start with the rhyme. But if you look at how well some people do rhyme, or how well some people do verse, or how there's just so many different ways to go about it. I think a really great way to get started is to see how well other people do it. Sadly, sometimes you can see how crappy other people do it. Sometimes I'll go to the library and I'll be like, how did this book get published? How? Who's the editor on this? Who's an agent? I'm not submitting to them. How? But everyone has different preferences. But I think one really good way to get started figuring out your voice, who you are, is to take a look at all the possibilities, because there's so many. I know one writer who will sit down, and if they really like a specific author that has a lot, she will type in Word, and she'll type out the book, the words, and she'll study them. She'll study the page turn. She'll study how many lines are on each page. She'll study the cadence. And she doesn't necessarily, try to mimic word for word, but she has a really good feel of what it took to make that happen. And I think that's a really smart way. I don't like to do that because then I do tend to write in somebody else's voice. I've done a lot of writing. So that is a trap for me, because then I find myself writing in somebody else's voice. So That doesn't work so well for me. But when you're sitting down with an idea, I just try to figure out where I'm going.
Yeah.
Like, you know,
You actually kind of segued a couple. You answered one of my questions already, like who are people that inspire you? So that actually connects really well, though, with the next thing that I want to ask, and that is how important is help in the process? Because you're talking about this is something that, from what I'm hearing from you, requires a lot of different moving parts. The author has one job, but also you need illustrators, editors, all of those kind of things. And I think that another mistake people may make in children's books is they think that they can do everything themselves because, I mean, it's just a picture book. Why do I need all of this help? So how important is it to put that ego aside and begin looking for help? And how do you find the right help?
now those are very good questions. So for that's also a really good opportunity for me to point out that unless you are self-publishing, you have nothing to do with the illustrations. That very first book that I wrote, I assumed, like, I took pictures because it was the story of these frogs that took over. I had an errant pink tennis shoe that because I'm lazy, I left at the front of my house. After I went for a run, I kicked off my shoes. For some reason, only one of them made it back in the house. Well, it was there for so long that frogs decided to make that their home. And they were there. I mean, that shoe was out there for like 2 years. So the kids and I would go and we would look at the shoe and the frog and we would make up stories about it. So that's what my story was about, the frog and that pink shoe. And in that case, the pink shoe was important because it was very descriptive of the fact that it was a pink shoe, because it was a boy living in a pink shoe and it was against, a dark background. And in that case, I took pictures from a bunch of different angles. I took pictures of different frogs off the internet, and I submitted all of it with them. Like, this is what it would look like, because I hadn't done my homework enough to know that I have no say in that it was completely irrelevant, that what my shoe looked like, the frog that I was picturing, is completely irrelevant, because that's not my job. As a writer, my job is to write. When I submit it to an editor, it's the editor's job to figure out who's the best illustrator. When they find the illustrator, it's the illustrator's job to figure out what the frog looked like, what the shoe looks like, where it's going to be placed. And in all my books, I have never met my illustrators. I don't know where they live, don't know what they look like. I've never talked to them, no idea. So when you're writing your book, don't include any illustrations. Don't worry about that aspect.
Gotcha.
Let go of that. Unless you're self-publishing, which is so much work. I'm going to highly recommend that you get professional help. You don't do it on your own. Don't go to someone that can help you.
Well, we're certainly out there, ladies and gentlemen, for those of you that are listening. Yeah, I mean, I agree, and that's something that we run into that so often. So many people that have been, in the times that we work in the fiction space, people that have been trying themselves to do it themselves and try to do everything themselves, they find themselves underwater in many cases. And there's just so much that's in publishing. People don't really realize how much work actually goes into just getting the book done.
Right. And there's a website, Kidlit 411, KIDLIT 411. It's completely free resource. They're the best people in the world. They have a Facebook page. You go there, you post a question like, having trouble with my manuscript. Would anybody be willing to take a look and give me this feedback? And they're the best. There'll be 15 people that will reply saying, I'm happy to comment, or send it to me, or anybody want to swap. I think actually they have a critique matching, like they can help you find a critique partner. SCBWI, you'd think for a bunch of writers, they'd find a better acronym. But the Society of Children's Book Writers and Illustrators, they're a great resource. They have locally, anywhere that you live, there's going to be an SCBWI chapter near you. But absolutely positively reach out to other children's book writers for help. because you definitely need another set of eyes on it. And I know this is going to sound really harsh, but it's not as good as you think it is. Because like I said, there's a formula, there's an expectation in the industry for what a children's book should look like, for what it should sound like. And people think, well, some people, raising my hand, think, well, I'm not going to write it like that because mine is so much better. This is so unique. But that's not what publishers in traditional publishing, that's not what they're looking for.
Right.
That's not what sells. That's not what people want to buy. So don't be afraid to ask for help, because it's hard. It's so much better than people realize.
Do you feel like generative AI is going to start dropping the quality of children's books?
Well, I feel this is going to sound really harsh, but I feel like in some way, self-publishing has, because it's given it, people have taken the shortcuts. With self-publishing, they're just like, I just want to do it. I'm not going to ask for help. And then they do it, and they could have made it so much better. Like, I've talked to people that have said, they've shown me their book and they're like, oh yeah, no, that's where the typo is. Just keep going. And, you know, they're like, oh, I'm going to give you this one because I have boxes of this in my, this was the first generation. I have boxes of these in my garage because I can't sell them, blah, 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 blah. Because they're in such a hurry to get to market that they aren't taking the necessary steps. Right. So I think AI can either help or hurt. AI can either do the same thing, or it's either going to make it worse, or maybe it'll alleviate some of those mistakes. I don't know.
I tend to agree with you on that, because I think that the mistake that people make is that they see AI as a replacement for having to do the work, rather than being the supplement to aid them in getting to the point where they can do the work, especially with the help of others that can come in and help them smooth out their ideas.
Yes, yes. Now I have to go back and say that there are some self-publishing, there are some hybrid publishing, there are some books that are amazing and wonderful. So I don't want to, you know,
Oh, absolutely.
I'm not saying that self-publishing.
we love our hybrid books as well.
Right. Yeah. So I'm not saying that self-publishing is always a mistake, but I'm saying if you are going to go that way, and hybrid is always, I think hybrid is always a better alternative than self-publishing, because with hybrid, you do have the intervention of professionals to come in and be that extra set of eyes.
And I think when people miss about hybrid is they look at the cost and they're worried about it, but and they realize that if they do self-publishing, their costs are probably going to be very close to the same. They're just doing it for themselves.
Because they're not doing the math to see all the other aspects. They don't understand how many more steps. You know, it's like that picture of the poster where they say, where it's like, oh, this is where you gave up, and it's, you know, the door is hidden right behind the step that they left. It's something like that. But it's like when you give up just before you're about to succeed. It's the same thing where you think that this is all it's going to cost you, and you don't realize that there's so much hidden behind that door. It's kind of the opposite of giving up before you succeed, because there's so much more, so many more costs that people don't realize.
Bitsy, we are kind of running a little short on time, but I like to always, before the end, give you the floor for just a couple minutes to talk about just something that you feel like you haven't touched on, something that, you know, we can call it a golden nugget, even though I stole that from somebody else, so I'll probably stop using it. But you know, she's fine with it. It's we all borrow in the podcast world.
Sure.
But just something that our audience, you know, you can find that they would find universally applicable, something that they can use, something they can take and run with right away.
Okay, well, one of the things I would love to let them know is I have a free resource. It's called the 31-Day Author Platform Challenge, because as we were talking about, the authors sometimes we're not always our best advocate, because it's so personal. We're afraid to promote ourselves because it is so personal. We're just shy about it. So I have bitsykemper.com/challenge. And it's free. It's one thing every day that authors can do to promote themselves online. It might be post a poll, and then the next day is post the results of your poll. It's all one thing you can do. Maybe it'll take you 5 minutes, maybe it'll take you 15, but it's one thing every day for the span of 31 days to bump up your social media profile. So I think that's a great thing that authors at any level of their career can benefit from.
Awesome. And are there any other ways in which our audience can find and interact with you?
BitsyKemper.com is the best way right now. At Bitsy Kemper is all my social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. I'm just getting more involved in. My book, actually, when this airs, my book will just come out, Mommy and Me, Micro Moments. It's the devotional for moms and little kids. And then Best Friends with Grandma should come out next fall with The Little Press, an imprint of the Bless This Press, which is an imprint of The Little Press. So
fantastic. And ladies and gentlemen, the links for that will be down below as always. Bitsy, we can keep on going for a long time. I love picking your brain. This is an interesting topic, but yeah, obviously the time is up, but we really enjoyed having you, and we wish you so much success and the best in your endeavors.
Oh, I'm so excited to be able to be here and be able to talk to people about kids' books, because that's my absolute favorite. And yeah, I could talk all day.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you, Bitsy.